Hey, friend, thanks for listening to the Compare to Who show. I'm Heather Creekmore. I'm glad you're here. We have an awesome episode today. I am so excited about this, y'all. It's just so good. So today I'm talking to Travis Stewart. We're continuing this image and personality theme, the series we're in, but Travis is going to help us look at how our personality or some of these core motivations, fears, those sorts of things connect to body image issues and food issues. So let me tell you a little bit about Travis. Travis Stewart's been mentoring others since 1992. He became a licensed professional counselor in 2005. His approach is relational, creative, and he helps people understand their story while also building hope for their future. He has a wide variety of experience with issues that might lead people to seek out professional help. This includes special interest issues like compulsive and addictive behaviors, internet and video, game addiction, eating disorders, shopping addiction, and spirituality. He was a visionary for the annual Hungry for Hope conference, which is a faith-based conference that provides training and help for both professionals and lay people in the treatment of eating disorders. He's a regular consultant to Finding Balance, which is a great friend of Compared to Who, and he's spoken at schools all over the country. Travis graduated from the University of Nebraska in 91 with a degree in advertising, but immediately began working with the international ministry, the Navigators, mentoring students. After 8 years, his desire to better understand how people change, and through his own experience of receiving help from a professional counselor, Travis decided to return to school. He earned a Master of Arts in Counseling and a Master of Arts in Theological Studies, both from Covenant Seminary in St. Louis. He's a licensed professional counselor in the state of Missouri. And you guys are going to get so much out of our conversation today. I can't wait. Share this episode with your friends. This is going to be 2 parts. So there's going to be today and then Friday's episode. They're both so good. So plan on sharing them with friends because you're going to learn so much. I won't say any more. Let's just get to it. Here we go. Welcome to Compare to Who, the podcast to help you make peace with your body so you can savor God's rest and feel His love. If you're tired of fighting body image the world's way, Compare to Who is the show for you. You've likely heard lots of talk about loving your body, but my goal is different. Striving to fall in love with stretch marks and cellulite is a little silly to me. Instead, I want to encourage you and remind you with the truth of Scripture that you are seen, you are known, and you are loved no matter what your size or shape. Here, the pressure is off. If you're looking for real talk, biblical encouragement, and regular reminders that God loves you and you're not alone, you've come to the right place. I hope you enjoy today's show, and hey, tell a friend about it. Travis Stewart, welcome to the Compare to Who show today.
Thank you. So good to be with you.
Well, I'm excited to have this conversation. Like everyone in my circle of eating disorder, recovery, food freedom folks, everyone's like, have you talked to Travis yet? Have you had Travis on the show yet? Do you know Travis? And I've been like, no, I don't know Travis. Who's Travis? And so finally, we got to connect a couple of months ago. Yeah. And I'm grateful because I have been looking for someone to come on the show and talk with me a little bit about the ways eating disorder, body image issues affects people with, and I'm going to just use this term personality, with people with different personalities in slightly different ways. And so that's where we're going to go today. Travis, I'm excited to have you on the show to talk about this. Let's just start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Personality. Okay. That's like just this catchy phrase that everyone talks about, personality. And there's all these different tests for personality type, and you could be a lion number 2 blue, I'm trying to think, like ESFP. Like there's all these different labels we can wear around personality. Like what really is this personality thing? What are we really talking about here?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's really hard to define in some ways. It's a word we use all the time in our culture. You know, when they say, oh, that person has a fun personality or a perfectionistic personality, like we use that and we sort of know what each other means. But like when you really start to dive into what that means, I think it's really tough. I'm not I'm not a PhD in personality or anything like that. I've done some thinking around this topic. I have some good friends who are sort of leaders in the field of one of the personality tests and things like that. But it, I think it's really hard to nail it down to say this is what personality is. I'm guessing there are PhD students out there who have studied it and probably have tried to define it. But I think from where I come from, I think personality really is a combination of kind of temperament that we're born with. So we can think about genetics. Like I was just with my parents this past weekend, and not only do I like see myself in my dad as I get older, like my facial features and stuff like that, but I also see myself in my mom in like how she responds to certain things, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, some of that happened because I was raised by them. And some of that I think is genetic. Like we're just born wired certain ways. And so that's part of personality, the genetics. My family of origin, my experiences growing up, that's part of personality, right? And then the experiences I have after or outside of home, right? So experiences I might have in grade school, or I moved a lot as a kid. I was a military kid. That shaped my personality. It made me, on one hand, adaptable, right? I had to learn quickly. It also made me vulnerable to, in my case, I think people pleasing, because I was always trying to figure out to fit in. So that's personality. So there's a lot of pieces, and then scripture talks about God remaking us, right? And we're new creatures. And so now I have this new source of life and energy coming in that's remaking me. I read recently about in the Old Testament, it talks about God will take away our hearts of stone and give us hearts of flesh. Paul David Tripp was the author I was reading, and he basically says what that means is you have a heart that goes from unchangeable, heart of stone, you can't change it, to a heart of flesh, which is one that can be molded and changes. And so we're always changing. So that's personality. So it's a big topic. And so I think about it largely in the ways of story, and temperament and genetics and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. So it's not nature or nurture. It's
nature,
nurture, and then for the believer, renewed nature.
Yes, right.
Second
All of the
nature.
above.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Well, I was always a big fan of all the personality tests. I don't know. That's probably part of my personality, is that I wanted to know my personality. And then I remember taking some of the tests, and they would be like, and if you hate taking this test right now and don't want to know your personality, that means you're this type. And so I always thought that was fascinating too. But
that was me, by the way.
That was you. You were that guy. That's awesome.
Right. That was me.
You didn't want to be put in a box.
I did not like person. It wasn't that. I never fit, because I fit in so many categories, which someone will probably say, well, that's this type. So
well,
I don't know.
I'm an ESTJ, or at least I was at age 20 on the Myers-Briggs. And then I took it probably age 30, early mid 30s. And I was like an ESTP. And so my PJ had changed. I don't know. And I was just a big fan of Myers-Briggs. And then I watched a documentary and read the book. And I think you read it too, The Personality Brokers. Where
I think that was the one I read. I'm not sure if that's the one. I know I read one on the Myers-Briggs, though,
where she talks about, like, it uncovers the origins of Myers and Briggs and talks about their story. And I realized, I'm like, oh my word, this was all basically just made up. I mean, she basically just like watched people and created this thing. And that was a real wake-up call for me in a way, because just like Enneagram, I know people have strong feelings both ways on the Enneagram, and there's all kinds of stories circulating about the origins of the Enneagram. But when I read that about Myers-Briggs, I was like, oh my goodness, it's the same. Like all of these devices to figure out our personalities were made by a fallible human being and may be used for evil, but they may also be used for good. And so I just want to put that out there as a blanket disclaimer. If you hear language and it's like, oh, that sounds like that personality test as you're listening today, like, friend, no, we can use things that have been made by man to help us, but we always have to take it back to scripture. We always have to root it and ground it in God's truth, not the truth of what some woman came up with about putting people into
Right.
categorizations, right? So, but Travis, as you think about personalities, you like to go beyond just traits and behaviors to something called the core needs of the heart. What's
Yeah.
really motivating those traits and behaviors? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's great. And I think the way I think about tests and stuff is similar. I think what we can do as people, even people who aren't Christians, can observe the world and say, I see some patterns here, right? And these patterns make sense, and they can be helpful to us if we understand our patterns, right? And so that falls into not only personality tests, but that falls into other areas of life. There's all kinds of various lives where we categorize things, and we're doing the best we can. And so I agree with you that they can be helpful. And you also need to have a foundation of scripture that supersedes any of the beliefs of the personality tests. So, but yeah, I think for me, where I have been most drawn, and even when I do dive into some of those because I've taken over the years many different personality tests, what most fascinates me is when a test like that or some sort of book or something points me to what is going on in my heart. Mm-hmm. What is the longing of my heart? And then how is that then expressed through my personality, right? And how does that play out in behavior? And I think that's largely how I think about clients that I work with is, okay, if we're just talking about the behavior, we're not really touching the issues that need to change, right? And so we need to look at what's the function of the behavior. In other words, what is driving the behavior? What is the longing and things like that? So one resource that I've shared with you that we can talk about here briefly is there was a book by Mark and Debbie Laser, Laaser, and it's called Seven Desires of the Heart. And Mark was a therapist who worked in the field of addiction. And this was 7 categories they came up with, he and his wife, as they worked with clients. Mm-hmm. So he was in recovery himself, but then as they worked with clients, they begin to see it. And again, there's another example of somebody trying to create a categories.
Sure.
Because it's helpful.
Sure.
It's helpful. These aren't like, inspired by God categories. They're just somebody's best efforts. And so we can talk through those. I can share those 7 categories with you, I think, as a foundation for our personalities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's do that. And as you're sharing them, any way you can connect that to how you would maybe see that core need of the heart, like present itself with like ED behaviors or even, body image issues. I'd love to have that connection as well, if you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, the first one that they identified is the need to be heard and understood. Right. And that one doesn't take a lot of explaining, I don't think. I think we all sort of get that one. Like, I want to be heard and I want to be understood, or I want somebody, even if they don't fully understand my experience, to do the best they can to understand my experience, to ask questions and try to see things from my perspective. That's so critical in marriages and working relationships and parenting and things like that. So we have this deep longing to be heard and understood. And that, I think, is so critical, especially in clients that I have worked with in treatment for eating disorders, but outpatient as well. But one of the things that's so helpful when they come to a therapist is that somebody will hear and understand and not be like shocked by what they're, the secrets that they're sharing or the shame that they're carrying. And so just that's such a part of healing. That's why I think group work is really helpful. Whether that's small groups in a church or small group of friends or a therapy group, is that you get this sense of being heard and understood, right?
Yeah.
And so,
and
go ahead.
Let me jump in, because it just made me think of, I shared some things in Compared to Who, my first book, that I was, would have been, I probably couldn't have told you face to face, were
Hmm.
behaviors of mine, but somehow in the anonymity of writing a book, I shared some things. One of them
Right.
being that I used to hide candy wrappers in the bottom, or any quote unquote junk food wrappers. I would put that in the bottom of the trash. I would pick up whatever trash was there and
Hmm.
I would put that
Hmm.
underneath. And from the heard and understood standpoint, I have had more people write me about that one, little story in the book than anything else. More people
Yeah.
have reached out because they finally felt understood because
Yeah.
someone had the same, I don't know if you call that a pathology, but the
Yeah.
same issue they did. So
Yeah.
that resonates.
Well, and that ties into, I mean, core to so many of our compulsive issues is shame, right?
Yeah.
And so you're feeling shame. And so there's only really, in my opinion, I'm not a shame researcher like Brene Brown or somebody like that,
Mhm.
but from what I would understand, both personally and professionally, the only way shame gets healed is
Mhm.
when you share something in the context of safe community and you
Mhm.
find out you're still accepted. You cannot
Yeah.
heal shame by yourself. It
Mhm.
just doesn't work. Shame is a relational concept.
Mhm.
So we've really got to, that's such a big part of that. So
That's good.
you helped people with their shame, you
Yeah.
know, by sharing something that you felt shame about. So,
Yeah.
so that's number one, heard and
Okay.
understood.
Okay. Go ahead.
The second one is to be affirmed.
Mm.
So we really need affirmation. So this one's easy to sort of tie into an eating disorder behavior, right?
Mhm.
What's fascinating is, people ask me what I do, and I have a little different role right now, but I still talk a lot about eating disorders. And whenever the topic comes up in sort of meet someone on an airplane or in a conversation like that, the word control usually comes up. Well,
Mhm.
isn't anorexia about control?
Mhm.
I can't tell you how many times I've been asked that, and
Mhm.
certainly there's elements of that in anorexic behavior, restrictive behavior. So let's say someone listening to your podcast they aren't diagnosed with anorexia, but they might use restrictive behaviors, right?
Mhm.
So this idea of control, I don't think that's not, in my experience, is not as powerful as what I'm about to tell you.
Mhm.
If I were to ask many clients about if you followed all of the restrictive thoughts in your head during the day, at the end of the day, how would you feel? And the most common answer I have heard is accomplished,
Mhm.
which is very close to affirmed.
Mhm.
I'm good at something. I feel
Mhm.
like I've done something right. I feel like I'm
Mhm.
good at dieting or good at losing weight or good at controlling my diet. We long to be good at something.
Mhm.
And then we long to be told when we've done a good job.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important to affirm people in healthy ways. Not like, I'm
Mhm.
not talking about the mom who tells the American Idol contestant they're a great singer when they're not. you know, we don't need false
Yeah.
affirmation. We
Yeah.
need genuine affirmation. Hey,
Yeah.
you're good at writing, or you're
Mhm.
you're a good communicator, or that type of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it's an identity issue, right? I mean,
It's
I think
it's absolutely.
and I know from my eating disorder past, I mean, I was the gym girl. Like that was a big part
Mm-hmm.
of my identity.
Mm-hmm.
My identity was
Right.
I ate a certain way and I worked out a certain number of days a week. And that's what I wanted affirmation for. I don't know if
That's right.
affirmation's my core need, but I can definitely see the connection there.
It is a core need, is what I
Mm-hmm.
would say. I
Yeah.
think it's a core need. So,
Yeah.
and that's very similar to the third one, which
Okay.
is blessing. All
Mm.
right. So, blessing is a word that we tend to use in Christian circles. I'm going to use another word that I think helps explain it, and that is enjoyed, that we
Mm.
feel enjoyed.
Mm.
Right. And so there is a blessing that I can give you when I speak my enjoyment over you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, a great way to illustrate this that I've used for a long time is my son loves basketball. Right. And so if I were to go watch him play a basketball game and he, at the end of the game, and he came off the court and I said, man, you did a great job. You passed the ball well. You played good defense. You were a good communicator. I saw you, rebound hard. Those
Mm.
are all affirmation. Right. And
Mm.
we need that. That's one of the ways we learn what we're good at.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
If he, and if he walked off the court in the end of the game and I said, regardless of his performance, I said, I love watching you play basketball.
Mm.
That's blessing.
Yeah.
Right? Two different, both
Yeah.
needed two different experiences.
Yeah.
One says, here's what you're good at and well done. And one says, gosh, I don't care how well you did. I just love being with you.
Yeah.
right? So we need both of those. And so I think we long for, sometimes when we're working for affirmation, what we really long for is blessing,
Yes.
you
I
know.
so
Just,
our mutual friend, Ken Quinn at the Center for Biblical
yes.
Counseling
Yeah.
in Dallas. We had some connections in common when we met. Ken used to say it like this: "You want to be delighted in."
Mm-hmm.
That was
Yep.
the way he phrased it. And the
Absolutely.
distinction, especially in marriage, I think the distinction is to your basketball example, the distinction in marriage would be, oh, you're beautiful, you look
Mm-hmm.
nice, you look good, or I delight in you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love being with you. And
I
so
love
that,
being
yeah,
with you.
that
Yeah.
resonates.
Yeah.
What's the next one, Travis?
All right. So the next one would be to be safe. So we have a longing for physical safety, financial safety, emotional safety, all the kinds of the safeties that you can think of. And I think this may be the biggest one. If I had to only pick one of these seven, safety would probably be the one that I think drives most behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what does that look like? So the person who restricts because they want to feel accomplished, well, the accomplishment in some ways is about feeling safe. If
Mm-hmm.
I accomplish enough, I'm safe. If I
Mm-hmm.
earn enough money, I'm safe. If I get good enough grades, I'm safe. I'm safe in relationships. People will choose me. I'm safe in my ability to pay rent, right? All those kinds of things. A mentor of mine has said perfectionism is never about being perfect. It's about feeling safe,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's underneath so many things, right? And so it's almost like a super category of its own. um, but so let's say we talked a little bit about restricting behaviors. Let's talk about binging behaviors,
Okay.
right? Or overeating. Well, so let's say you have a bad day at work, right? And you feel shame or fear. Your boss came in and said something like, I can't believe you did that. You screwed up, so now you feel afraid you might lose your job, and you feel shame for the mistake you made, right? What do you need to do? Well, you need to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple different ways you can do that. Some people are going to go to the gym and work out, right? And they're going to stay late. They're going to work 4 more hours at the
Mm-hmm.
office, right? Because I'm going to earn my position. But
Right.
what's driving them is this sense of feeling afraid and
Mm-hmm.
shameful. I'm going to show that I'm a good employee, and I'm going to earn my position. That's one way to do it. Another way to feel safe is to check out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go and I'm going to order my favorite food, and I'm going to sit down in front of my favorite TV show, and I'm going to binge Netflix and ice cream. And it's in that sense, you're distancing yoth from the fear and the emotion. You're sort of shutting it off and going, I'm not going to feel, right?
Yeah.
They're both sides are about dealing with that anxiety and fear and shame inside and creating a sense of safety. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why they're called comfort foods, right?
Right.
They're
Right.
comforting us when we don't feel safe.
Right.
This is definitely a big one for me. And as I think about it, I think I believed in my eating disorder behavior, obsessive exercising behavior. I believed I could keep myself safe from negative opinions of other people. That was,
Mm-hmm.
I think, how it played out for me. And even the negative opinions of myself, right? Maybe I would be
Right.
safe from my own condemnation of myself
Yep.
if I could just follow all the rules and, get the body that I thought would make me safe. So yeah, I think that's a really big one.
Yeah, it can be safe from the judgment of others. It can be safe from the sexual advances of others.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of ways that it could play out.
Yeah.
Is I'm going to change my body so that I experience a sense of safety, acceptance, or isolation, or whatever. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a really important one for people to sort of dive into is
Yeah.
how might my behavior be an effort to keep myself safe?
Right. Right. And the reality, I mean, I've written about this, but just making that cognitive recognition that the way I eat or the way I exercise can't actually keep me safe, right? I mean,
Right.
that's a hard thing to swallow. As I talk
It
to coaching
is.
clients, you're like, oh, but I'd rather believe it can, right? Or safe from
And what's
disease,
true,
or there's all
like,
different ways. Yeah, go ahead.
right. I'm safe from fat, or I'm safe from toxic foods or unclean foods or whatever. But in the end, I think there's one thing we have to come to grips with. We live in an unsafe world, and you
Mm.
cannot fully be safe.
Right.
And we, especially as Americans, Westerners, it's hard for us to accept that. But the
Mm.
reality is it's an unpredictable. If we don't know that after a pandemic,
Yeah.
we weren't paying attention.
Right.
But there is an unsafe world out there, and so ultimately we have to trust God with ourselves in an unsafe world.
Right.
And that's a whole nother podcast episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
So
That's good. The next one.
yeah. So the next one would be touch, healthy physical touch. And so this would be, appropriate healthy touch in the context of relationships. So friendships, handshakes and hugs, and then closer relationships, snuggles, and then, appropriate sexual intimacy. Those are all needs that we have. And so those drive a lot of our behaviors. Now, sometimes what that might look like is if somebody thinks I'm too fat, nobody wants to touch me, I'm going to try to lose weight so that I get that touch, right? That might be driving a behavior. And that is rooted in our cultural belief that only people who look a certain way deserve to be touched or are touchable, right? And so both men and women believe that about particularly women's bodies. Our cultures is obsessed with thinking about that. I've been affected by that as a man, and I know the women I talk to. I was surprised when I first started working with eating disorders is how much women thought about their own bodies. I knew men struggled thinking about women's bodies. I hadn't flipped it around and realized how much comparison and self-hatred that was. But that might be driven by a desire for touch, to be chosen and all those kinds of things. And so that's a big one. It's also important whenever I mention this one, it just triggers in my memory that all of these needs are legitimate, but they can all be manipulated. So certainly touch can be manipulated or abusive, right? But so can being heard and understood. You might have someone who hears you and understands you, but then gossips about you or manipulates you with what they heard and understood. So all of these can be done. So, we long for these to be met in healthy ways. So that one's touch.
That's good. What's the next one?
Okay. The next one would be to be chosen. Right. And so this is the idea that someone's going to pick me to be a friend, a teammate, an employee, a spouse, a partner of some sort. There's just such a longing. God made us for relationship. God existed in relationship as a Trinity before the creation of the world. And that is a core expression of who God is and then who we are because we are made in the image of God. So we long for relationship, and relationship happens when someone says, hey, I choose to spend time with you. Do you want to grab coffee together? Right. Or, would you marry me? Those are just expressions, different, parts of the continuum of choosing someone. And so that's such a longing for us. And again, that can tie into body image, right? It can tie into how we eat. It can, what's fascinating is when you are around people very long, the issue of food will come up, right? And so sometimes we say, well, I went on a diet because we long to be chosen, like we long to fit into the group, right? Or for someone to pick us. So that's a close one. And I'm going to just tie it into the last one, which is to be included, because these two are very close. Included is I'm a part of a community, I'm part of a group. So it might be I'm a St. Louis Cardinals baseball fan. I live in St. Louis, right? So I'm a Cardinals fan. I belong to that group. I'm included. But of course, it's more powerful than that. It's like I'm a part of this family. I'm a part of this church. And so we long to be included. And so again, we might hop on the latest diet craze because our friends are doing it.
Right.
Or we want to fit in the newest, style of Lululemon pants. And so we don't want to be left out, but we got to change our bodies to fit into a certain thing. So you can see how all of those core needs, core longings are driving behaviors. So that's why I think it's so important to look beyond personality and beyond behaviors to what's going on underneath. What is the legitimate need? I remember when I was a counseling student, Professor Richard Winter always talked about what's the legitimate need underneath the illegitimate behavior.
That's good.
Because there's always something there.
Yeah.
So yeah, is that helpful?
Yeah, that's really good. I'm thinking about chosen in a couple ways. I'm thinking about, so some listeners going to be able to relate to this. I wonder how many people with eating disorders and body image issues have the same story from elementary school. I wasn't chosen last for kickball team in elementary
Mm-hmm.
school, but I was always second to last.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, and that, how many years ago? I'm in my mid 40s now. Maybe I have to say late 40s. Ooh, I don't like saying that. But how many decades ago that was, and
Yes.
still vividly remember being on that line, waiting, hoping, team one or team two was going to choose me. So I wouldn't be standing there all by myself. So that
Right.
makes sense to me. Also, thinking about being chosen. So I didn't meet my husband until we were 30. So we got married at 31 years old. But I remember believing that being chosen by a man, that getting engaged, getting
Mm-hmm.
married would fix all these behaviors for me. I thought it
Right.
would
Right.
all just poof, go away. I'd wake up in the morning after my wedding and yay, I feel good now. I don't have to worry about food and body issues anymore. And that was a
That's right.
tragic disappointment for me. Morning after, I was really mad at my husband for a while because I thought he must just
Right.
not be doing it right, must not be a good
Right.
husband because he was supposed to make all that go away. So that one is very real as well. And then included, yeah, that's an interesting motivation, right? Because especially in our diet culture, as you know, Travis, right? Like that, like if you're the one person eating whatever the demonized food of the decade or the year is, like you are excluded. Everyone's looking
Mm-hmm.
down their noses at you like, really? You're eating carbohydrates? What?
Right.
So
Right.
that I would see as a big barrier to someone's freedom if inclusion is the desire of the heart and that gets stuck there. Go ahead.
I think that's fascinating. Yeah. And what's interesting is that in our Christian culture, when we read the New Testament, we often become very disappointed or judgmental of the Pharisees because the Pharisees had so much self-righteousness, right? They had this list of behaviors that if you did it, you were included, you're in the in group. And if you don't do it, you're not in the in group. And Jesus confronted them. And so we can read it and go, gosh, those Pharisees were horrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's happening in our culture right now, both inside and outside the church, is there's many ways in which our culture is becoming more and more self-righteous. And now it doesn't look like typical self-righteousness where it's like a Christian self-righteousness, right? But it's if you didn't vote the same way as me, then I'm judging you. Or
Mm-hmm.
if you're eating gluten, or if you're eating, fill in the blank on a certain food, like there is a lot of self-righteousness that
Mm-hmm.
goes into our cultural dialogues
Mm-hmm.
and relationships and things like that. And so, and then it results in people feeling excluded or things like that. So yeah. And I think what's interesting about the chosen one too is it has a dark side or as a flip side. So um I was a fairly athletic kid, so I never experienced getting picked last, right? I don't know that I was the first one picked, but I was athletic enough to be, at least in the middle of the pack and things like that. But what I know is true is that sometimes getting chosen for an ability, or even your looks is unsatisfying too.
Mm-hmm.
So two stories stand out to me, briefly, that I'll share. One is, for a while I worked. There's a ministry called Models for Christ, and it's a Christian outreach into the fashion industry. A guy named
Okay.
Jeff Kallenberg and his wife. I apologize, can't remember her first name right now, but I talked to Jeff once, and I was interacting with them because kind of doing eating disorder things. And he told me once, he said, models are some of the most insecure people I've ever met. And he was a model. He had modeled himself. He said, because they're constantly told, you're too tall, you're too short, you're too fat, you're too thin, you're too blonde, you're too brunette. And they're constantly being rejected. And we have this image of models must have great self-image,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Mm-hmm.
that's not what he told me.
Yeah.
And that came home to me more. I had a client, she was probably 16 or 17 at the time, and strikingly beautiful young woman. And she came to treatment, and I won't ever forget this. It was our first session. We were sitting outside. It was a beautiful day. We were on the porch in the treatment center, and I was getting to know her story. And Not too long into the story, she said, my whole life I've been told I'm beautiful. But she said, but nobody ever wanted to know me. Mm. Like they just wanted to relate to the beautiful me.
Yeah.
And so what happens is we sometimes think the person who gets chosen first is happy, but often they go, I'm only chosen because I'm a good athlete. Nobody wants to know me as a friend.
Yeah.
Right. And so then that all gets twisted. So we buy these lies that will be chosen. And like, if I get married, everything's going to be great.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't play out.
Yeah. I mean, I did a series last spring with different models. And one of them was a runway model. And she talked about how before the show, they basically had to line up essentially naked and have 5 or 6 people walk up and down the path, kind of eyeing them up and down and, you know, turning their nose up and, you know, pinching inches, that kind of thing. Yeah. And the scrutiny that they were under. So yeah, I completely know those stories too. And, you know, I guess that goes back to identity too, doesn't it, Travis? It's if our identity is wrapped into our athletic ability, if our identity is wrapped into the way we look like that, you know, it's so fragile. Right.
Well, and I think one of the ways I've started thinking about it recently is that we have confused performance categories with relational categories. And what I mean is, if you're thin enough or you're smart enough and you get chosen for that, that's a performance thing, right? That's something you perform. Relational categories come out of relational bonds. So in other words, you know, I will die for my kids. And that has nothing to do with their performance. Like, even if they're, you know, rude to me, I mean, I'll lay down my life for them, right? Yeah. That's a relational bond. And that's how God relates to us. He doesn't relate to us on performance. So we've got to be careful we don't confuse relationship with performance.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Have you read the book Quiet by Susan Cain? About introverts. No, that's a great book.
Oh, I've heard of that. Yes.
Yeah. She talks about, and I'm going to do a whole show on this, probably close to this episode airing will be this other episode airing. But as I read it, I was just thinking about the different ways that we try to manage our body size, our body shape, right? But we also try to manage our quote unquote personality. We try to manage our image. And she talks about the transformation from a culture that valued people who were honest and people who were hardworking to a culture that valued people who were magnetic and extroverted. And and the book is really about introversion, but she does a great job of looking into like how we became a culture that basically idolizes the great looking extrovert, and the different ways that's impacted us as a society. So it's pretty interesting.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, this has been super helpful. You're going to come back in the next episode and we're going to talk about, how would you capture it? It's a practical way to what? Give me a teaser for the next show.
It's a framework of how to think about continuing what we're talking about. How do I think about my behaviors and why do I do what I do? And how do we heal those? And how do we grow from those? So for me, it's sort of a personality structure in a sense, but it's a way that I also think about therapy and coaching that I use with my clients. And so it's not as broad as a theory of counseling, but it's moving in that direction kind of thing.
Awesome. I can't wait. Okay. So you're going to have to come back and listen to the next episode and we'll talk about Travis's structure, theory, whatever word you want to put on it. So come back for that show. Travis, thanks for being on this episode.
Oh, this is great.
And we'll continue our conversation in the next one.
Thank you.
Oh, hey there, before you go, if something from today's show blessed you, may I ask a huge favor? Leave a review on your favorite platform. Seeing your 5-star reviews is a huge encouragement to me. Not sure how to do it? You can go to comparetowho.me/podcast, scroll to the bottom, and you'll find all the information. And while you're at comparetowho.me, check out some of the more than 500 articles on there about body image, comparison, all the things you're thinking about. Plus, you can find out more about my books, or you can grab a time for a free 10-minute call to see if coaching is right for you. I'm so honored to be a part of your journey out of body image and comparison frustration, and I can't wait to hear how God is working to set you free.